All right, we are starting Unit 9. We're talking all about factors. And 9.1 is a nice little review of stuff that you have definitely learned about before. So let's get straight into it. So remember that factors are the things that you multiply together. And then the answer that you get, we always call that the product. So write this down. I think this is better than any sort of written out definition of a factor. So example 1 tells us to list all factors of 24. Remember, factors just means a number that you can multiply together, and it gives you 24. So for example, off the top of my head, I can think of 3 times 8. Those are factors of 24. Let's list the rest of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of list them in order. So every single number has 1 as a factor. And you can do 1 times 24, but I'm going to wait because I know 24 is going to be the biggest, so I'll write it over here. What else could I do? Well, what's the next biggest number after 2 or after 1? Well, I could do 2. Yeah, I could do 2 times 12. Okay. Can I do 3? Yeah, we just listed 3 times 8. Can I do 4? Yes. Can I do 5? No, I can't do 5 times anything and get 24, but I can do 6. And I notice now that since I have 4 times 6, those go together, I can use that pattern. This next one is going to go with that 3, so this next one is going to be 8. This next one's going to go with that 2, and the last one goes with the 1. So this is a nice way to just kind of check, make sure you got all of your numbers. It's going to make this nice little upside down rainbow for you. All right, good. So we listed all the factors of 24 out. All right, we remember this phrase because we say it all the time. The greatest common factor. You need to have 2 numbers given to you, and you need to find the largest factor that both of those 2 numbers have. So pause the video and write this down. Okay, so for example, in this one's purple, we need to find the greatest common factor, GCF, of 12 and 32. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to list out all the factors of 12. I'm going to list out all the factors of 32. Okay, here's my factors of 12, right? So I could do 1 times 12, I could do 2 times 6, I could do 3 times 4. And here are my factors of 32. So I can do 1 times 32, I can do 2 times 16, or I can do 4 times 8. Okay, so it wants the greatest, the biggest common, that means they both have it, factor. So what's the biggest number that is on both of these lists? All right, so not 12, because I don't see 12 in this one. Definitely not 32 or 16. I don't see 6 on both. I don't see 8 on both. Oh, we actually had to go pretty far down. It was 4. That's the biggest number that they both have in common. So the greatest common factor is 4. All right. Pause the video and write this down, and then try example 2 on your own. When you unpause it, I will have the answers up here for you. All right, so here are our factors, our greatest common factors. We have 9, 15, and 1, because those are the biggest numbers that each one had on their list in common. If you are struggling to list out the factors, like if you missed any numbers on this list, remember that all you need to do is sit there and use the calculator, and let's say you're finding factors of 30. You could just sit there and type in 30 divided by, and let's say you're testing if 7 is a factor. Type in 7. Does they give you a nice whole number? No, it doesn't. So 7 is not a factor. So if you can't remember off the top of your head, and it is a lot to list them out, just real quick, get out a calculator and type those numbers in. See if you can divide by that number. Now it's still asking us to find the greatest common factor, but they didn't just give us numbers. They gave us terms. So we have a constant in each one, and we have some variables in each one. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start, and I'm going to find the greatest common factor of the constants, the 18 and the 27. And we actually just did that, right? Between 18 and 27, I listed them all out. The biggest number that they had in common was 9. So I'm going to start with the 9. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the variables. So I see that they both have some x's. Well, what's the most x's that they both have in common? So this one has 7 x's, but this one only has 3 x's. So I'm going to take the biggest exponent that I see between them, and it's this 3, and I'm going to use that variable. So that's how I find my greatest common factor if there are variables involved. And so really, this is still a factor, right? Because in order to get x to the power of 7, I could do x cubed times x to the 4th equals x to the 7th, right? So that's still a factor. I'm just kind of using a shortcut to find that factor. I'm using the biggest exponent that I see. So let's write those steps down. And what we're going to do is we're going to include this example next to each step. So we're going to write it next to each line. So go ahead and write these lines down first. Okay, so step 1 says find the greatest common factor of the coefficients. So remember, that's whatever number's out front. So I'm looking at 25 and 15. Well, between those two, the biggest number that they have in common I see is 5. Okay, so I can't go any bigger than 5. So my greatest common factor is 5 of those guys. Now the highest degree of each variable. So I'm going to look at the x's. So I have x to the 6th, x to the 4th. Well, what's the most I have in common between those two? It's the 4. That's the biggest I get. So it would be x to the 4th. And then let's look at the y's. So I have y squared and I have y to the 9th. What's the biggest between those? It's the squared. Okay, sweet. 3 says put it all together. So I'm going to multiply all of these together. I'm going to do my 5, x to the 4th, y squared. So 5x to the 4th, y squared. All right, write down example 3, please. So we're going to do this one together. So I'm going to look at my coefficients first. I have 12 and I have 18. Now I could sit here and list all of the factors out of 12 and 18, or I can do that in my head. So I'm going to kind of start as big as I can. Definitely it has to be 12 or less. Well, 12 isn't a factor of both. Okay, 8 is not a factor of both. 6 is, though. And so that's my greatest common factor. If you need to list them all out, absolutely, you can still do that. Now let's look at the variables. So they both have g's. And the biggest number that I see between the two is the 2. So it's going to be g squared. And that's it. Now let's look at b. So I'm looking at my coefficients. I have 16 and I have 12. Okay, between 16 and 12, can't be 12. That doesn't go into 16. But it could be 4. I think that's as big as I can get. So it's going to be 4. Now let's look at our variables. So I have a squared here. Well, how many a's do I have in this one? Absolutely none. So I don't have any a's in common. So I'm not even going to write a to the 0th or anything. I'm just going to put nothing. Okay, and then I have some b's, but I only have a b in this one. I don't have any b's here. So again, I'm not going to write any b's. They don't have any b's in common. So this one is just 4. No variables. This is our last example. Go ahead, copy it down and try it on your own. When you unpause the video, I'll have the answers up here. All right, for this one, the 5 and the 13, the only number that they had in common was 1. But notice I did not write 1 out front. I just left it off because you don't want to write 1 n squared ever. You just want to erase that 1 entirely. And then for the n's, they both had a 2. So that was the biggest number they had in common was 2. So it was n squared. For this one, even though this one was negative, I still just treated it like normal. Okay, so my factors were 1 and 2, or -1 and -2. And then when it came to 10, I had 1, 2, 5, and 10. So my biggest factor was a 2 there. And then for the a's, I had a to the 5th, a to the 4th. Well, the biggest was the 4, so I have a to the 4th. And then for my b's, the biggest, this is a 3, but remember this is really a 1. So the biggest I have here is 1. So it's really just b to the 1st, and I'm not going to put that 1 there. I'm just going to write b. So there we go.